Welcome to Shop Talks, which is a presentation of the In Kitchen. Free information, inkitchen.com. Impressions, the show here, their magazine. Got our sponsors, Los Angeles Apparel, Alpha Broder, Lane 7, Stalls, Transfer Express, and SPSI. Got a full bunch of talks next 2 days. Hope you can return. Right, Donna? And we're going to talk about screen making, from the most basic to the most advanced. All right, Stan Banks here. I got as my co-presenter, and Keith Perkins from Saati, and Brian Giddens from KIWO, and Kevin Kauth from Chromaline. And it's nice to have the best and brightest up here. And take it away, Stan.
So I want to flip it on his head. Usually we always start from the beginning and work our way up. I want to start from the top, and I want to ask you guys, what does the future of this process look like? Where is it headed?
Screen room of the future. What are we going to see?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the screen room of the future, less consumables, looking at equipment like the LTS. I know that there's other things that are coming out there as well, but that direct light technology where you're taking out the consumables, better resolution because you're skipping a process. You lose a little bit every step of the way, but when you skip a process, you can get better resolution, better details out of that. Not to mention being more efficient.
Without giving away any secrets, what else? What's coming, either from you or from other people? What do you imagine happening?
Well, as Kevin had mentioned, the future of the screen room being technology, less steps, less equipment, more efficiency. I share a lot with our customers that there's only really two pieces of equipment needed inside the screen room once you have a stretch screen, and that's an automatic coder and an LTS. And that derives from no consumables to, looking towards the perfect screen. I'm not sure that a laser type technology can be outperformed by much going forward. I know that there's other people in the mix to make a machine similar to ours, but it's going to be pretty hard to beat.
So yeah, what I see for the future is a lot of automation. There's a lot of labor issues that's going on here in the United States. People just don't want to work, so customers are going to involve more into automation. Lasers, automatic reclaims, coating equipment, anything to speed the process up, give you more consistency and better results.
And I'll mention on that too is with that labor problem, you can take somebody off the streets, and with an education, you don't have to give them training. They can come in and push a button and code a screen with a coder, and it's going to be perfect every time, versus hand coding and learning that process, learning the muscle memory and all that goes along with it. That automation process helps the educational process as well.
I actually saw at the FESPA show in Germany, a company, it wasn't perfected, but they were printing a screen. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but so it was actually printed on with the image in there. So no coding, they were just printing the part of the screen that was not. I mean, I think something like that might be coming along. I mean, it didn't need to be light safe. You could have the printer that printed your screens right at your press. You wouldn't be making the screens till it actually went on. I thought that was pretty advanced.
Yeah, we've looked at that technology, Rick, and there's some downfalls to it. One, it does trash the print heads a lot. It's very difficult to reclaim, but it is an interesting possibility in technology. So I think there's a lot of things coming in the future that we're not totally aware of just yet, but it's definitely going to change the game in a lot of places.
And it's funny, whenever you're talking about the future, you're talking about the present, you touched on it a little bit. Are you seeing an explosion of the sort of auto reclaiming? That always was like the worst job. It seems like a great job to replace.
Yeah, for sure. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. There's you look at from small reclaim machines to these huge reclaim machines. It's just become a viable option now.
What sets those machines apart? So like when you're going to decide, all right, we're going to invest into an auto reclaim. Obviously, you save on the labor, but what between the levels of those machines set them apart?
Service.
Yeah, service is definitely a big part of that, but also the components that go into it. How that machine is built, what components are used, if it's high pressure wash, or if it's just basically just dripping the chemicals on there. There's a vast difference between how they perform and the efficiency of those machines. But there's also a large price range when we're talking about those machines as well.
What does that price range look like?
There's several machines available, obviously, starting in around the $40,000 to $60,000 range for being intermediate, up to $125,000, $130,000. What we're finding is rinsing in between the processes is the better of the machines and more consistent. You can control the chemicals. There's no carry out or cross contamination. But I think Kevin touched base on this, but we have people running 50, 60 screens a day that are investing $100,000 in auto reclaim. Why? Because they can press a button. It's the consistency. There's not much training. It's easier to control the chemistry, even though, and contrary to some belief, the chemical costs are more expensive than a manual process, but the machine doesn't call in the sick. The machine shows up every day. There's a small learning curve with filtering the chemistry or changing it out at X number, whatever that may be. But in short, that machine just doesn't call in.
And honestly, I mean, when we look at the machines and how, how they're built and everything, there's a big difference, So I mean, you have to look at that when you go into them.
So I was going to say, so at what point do you know that you should start considering, right? I heard you say 50, 60 screens a day. At what point should a shop consider? Obviously, that labor thing is a problem, but what number of screens is like, hey, this is a good time to consider making that switch?
I think at any moment, it doesn't matter the amount of screens. It boils down to your budget. Yeah. What can you afford? Can you afford the labor? Will the labor do it, or do you invest in the automation? And like Keith said, it doesn't call in sick. It's there every day. Anybody can run that machine. So, it's not about a number anymore of how many screens. Where that's always been the ROI in the past.
Yeah.
Now it's all about labor.
And I'll also touch on too. It's cleaning of the screens is the most important part of screen printing, right? It doesn't matter who's making the emulsion. Any of us that are making emulsion, if you've got a dirty screen, it doesn't make a difference. You're going to have problems regardless of what emulsion you're putting on that screen. So that is the very most important part of that process in screen printing. So if you've got people that, they don't really care what they're doing, they're low labor, they hate their life, they hate their job, that's where, maybe if you've got the budget, you can put a piece of automated equipment in there and have good, consistent, clean screens instead of whatever you're getting.
If I can add to what Kevin said, we've got several accounts recently that are investing in equipment because they're having difficulty investing in the people. The training, the curve, the longevity of going through that process to train them to be able to be reliable, consistent, and truly believe that they're cleaning screens properly. But what I was going to say is we've got people purchasing these machines and only firing it up and running it 2 days a week. So they can, if they only do 50 screens a day, they can clean screens on a Wednesday and a Friday and not work any Saturdays, because typically that person with that job is calling in, or there's a lot of turnover. That's where everybody starts. And as Kevin mentioned, it's the most important step in the process of making screens, but it's the most abused. So we truly find a lot of people investing in that equipment to take that burden out of the screen making process.
Seems like the point has moved, yes? So it was only the very biggest shops would automate, and now the point of that is just going down, down, down.
It's across the board now. Everybody should look at whatever your budget in reclaim can handle. And that's why there's such a large range in pricing to fit everybody's budget.
Seems like same with coders, right? That was
Exactly.
only the domain of the biggest shops. Not anymore, right?
No, not at all. I think that everybody should look at coding equipment because it gives you that consistency, and you're not dependent on that person that can do it that day.
Yeah, and I've worked in shops before where, I was discussing these things like coders and, auto reclaim, and some of the employees were concerned that it was going to replace them. They still need people to run those machines, just the quality of life and everything that goes along with that, the consistency, it just makes things better for them in the screen room. We're not replacing anybody. Somebody still needs to run those machines.
Definitely. So the screen room is the dirty job nobody really wants to do. So I can definitely, the quality of life. You talk about things like quality of life and, the cost of labor and all of that kind of stuff, but getting somebody consistently to do that work. I've been in a situation, small shop, you can't get a person but for 2 weeks, and the next thing you know, they disappeared and you back cleaning screens, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's a huge, I think, point where it's like, well, do you see this going in manual shops, maybe multiple manual shops? Has it made that crossover yet?
I think at some point people mature in their business and they start to see the relevance of everything. We all kind of start out small-minded, and then, as you start to see your business develop, your goals start to change, and you start to look at all aspects of it, of how do I get better, how do I get bigger, and I think that's more the mentality of.
Yeah, I think we all look at, the presses, what press can we get, how can we get better there? We kind of think our exposure unit is like a one-size-fits-all unless we need a bigger one, right? We kind of get locked in, press. But once you got the best press, or you're not going to an auto or whatever the case is, I think, this is probably an area in the business that's been overlooked for a while, but now available. Now, what about the chemicals? Where has the chemicals gone as far as being eco-friendly and all that kind of stuff?
Most of the chemistry sold today is EPA and OSHA friendly. I mean, there's not a lot of harsh products out there, although there are, but everything's drain safe when it comes to the emulsion removers, the ink removers, the degreasers, and haze removers. When we look and talk about eco-friendly, you're probably more so looking towards press wash and the VOCs, the flash points. That's probably going to be the more harsher product that you're around versus the actual reclaim products. And some of those today can be diluted with water to your liking. They can be used 100%, no problem, but a lot of the formulas in today's technology, you're able to dilute those to your liking and to your shop, to your inks, because whether it's water-based, discharge, plastisol, HSA, silicone, they all truly require a different level of formulation. You can use one product straight, meaning RTU or out of the bucket, and it'll clean anything. I'm sorry. And I'll reiterate that. A ready-to-use ink remover used straight will cut just about anything, the proper one. But if you get into just plastisol, those can be diluted. And obviously, if you're diluting it more with water, it's even that much friendlier.
Yeah, I'd agree. Everybody's looking to get the most bang for your buck, and dilutables are definitely the future. How far can I cut this solvent? How far can I cut my stencil remover? And that's how part of this industry's changed a lot in the last 4 to 5 years is how can we stretch this product and put less down the drain?
Some of that's the equipment too, right? So
Absolutely.
with the automatic equipment, you're reusing some of the chemical. I know the application where you're able to maybe not turn it into a mist, but you can spray it on instead of people splashing it on or pouring it on.
Yeah, there's several application techniques you can use. Most of us have what we call a spray system, where you can spray the chemistry on a screen. It's generally an 1/8 to 1/4 ounce per square foot. You can really track that and get down to the pennies on cost per screen. And that goes with, and you can spray any of them but a caustic. You can't atomize a caustic, but those liquid products for spray application is what most people are used to, but the automated reclaim machines are filtering as they run through either an external filtration unit or like a bag system. Some people would reference that to like a pool filter, but they can be used until they start to stain, and then they can actually be pulled out of the machine and let set, which they call decanting. And as that settles, all the solids will fall to the bottom, and you can pull some of that liquid off the top and reuse that.
And with concentrates too, with the shipping costs of everything, it's much easier to ship a smaller container than a big drum of something. So if you have something that's concentrated, your shipping costs come down as well.
Yeah, and that goes into your waste too. You're throwing away less waste when you're done with the product.
Yeah, I use a one-liner quite often where I tell the customer, why would I sell you water? You know, it kind of makes them heckle and it changes the mood, but if you can sell a concentrate and talk them into diluting it to their liking, and they don't have to pay for the water that, you know, somebody might add, it's a nice
interesting.
one-liner and it breaks the mood.
Nah, that's definitely going to change the mood. It's like, I'm giving you the best I got, right? It's the most value, most bang for your buck. That kind of sums it up. Like, oh man, water, right?
All right, so let's go primitive here. So I was kind of curious when I put this together. What is the craziest stuff you've seen for like simple, do-it-yourself kind of approach that maybe you're like horrified, but like people are printing shirts? I put a little thing up there. That was my first paid job I did for somebody, and I exposed the screen. I had vellum with a piece of glass on top, no vacuum. I had a 150-watt bulb and a pie plate, and I had 45-minute exposure, and then I had no press, actually. I actually, by eye, put a self-stretch screen that I stretched by hand, and I printed thousands of shirts that way, actually.
You got to appreciate the history right there. That's a lot of history.
Anyway, that's pretty.
I've been spoiled.
That's my
I've been
crazy
spoiled.
shit. So what are you seeing out there?
Probably the craziest thing I've ever seen is somebody clean their screens with gasoline.
And bleach.
And,
Yep,
and-
bleach is normal.
And the guy with gasoline might have been smoking a cigarette while doing so. True story.
Actually,
man.
I knew somebody that did that, and they had just a giant fan blowing, and they cleaned it with gas. There was no tension on the screens, but he was printing like impressionistic paintings that he did, and it worked.
Is he still around today?
I was
Yes.
going to ask the same question.
Yes.
So I've got two. I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks since Rick sent me the email, but I've got two stories. They're true, I swear. The first one is when I started back in the mid-'80s, we had an arc lamp. We're talking like welding rods. That's how we exposed screens, and the fumes they're very distinct. If you've ever smelled them, you know.
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, we'll get pictures later. So I ran out of arc rods, and we had a rush job, and I had to expose the screen. And my boss
So
said,
you did this, Keith?
Oh, yeah, I
Oh,
did
okay.
this. So my boss said, and this is like 86, I think. My boss says, it's sunny today. I'm like, so? So they brought me a piece of glass and some foam, and I was like, well, what am I going to do with that? He said, well, I need this job printed today, so I need you to take that screen out in the parking lot, gravel parking lot that is, and expose that screen. And I looked at him like he had three eyes. So through trial and error, the third screen, I got it right, and I think it was like a 16 or 18-minute exposure. It was an old DW emulsion, diazo water-based, and we made it work. And I felt like Fred Flintstone that day, but it worked.
I don't think that's that uncommon, actually, around the world.
It really
No,
is.
that's
use
not
the
uncommon
sun.
at all.
Yeah.
I've got lots of customers
Yeah.
that do that when they've got oversized screens that can't fit in their
Yeah.
exposure unit, and they wheel them out into the
So
into
when
the
we
parking
flew in
lot.
this week, I had a guy call from Ohio, which is where I'm from. Their unit was down, and he was going to take a screen with our emulsion to outside in the parking lot, which of course I started laughing. He wanted to know the exposure. He's like, how long do I put this out in the parking lot?
Hey, Keith, I know what that exposure time, it's about the length of a cigarette.
And that's funny you should say. A lot of guys would say it's one or two cigarettes. Since I don't smoke, I have to pull somebody out of production to get them to smoke a cigarette. But the guy in Ohio this week took a screen to the parking lot and exposed the screen. So my second story, the craziest of all, Central Indiana, large format graphics, which the screens were probably the size of that second panel there, sponsored by. That's how big the screens were. And I noticed that his copyboard for shooting screens was only this big. And I'm standing around just curious, how you going to shoot that screen in this copyboard? And he kind of looked at me and he said, stick around and watch. So as inquisitive as I was, I stuck around, and he kept walking around the corner with a gallon of mineral spirits and a big squeegee. And I was shocked, but it worked very well. And to boot, it was a vignette fade, this half tone. But he laid the screen flat, poured mineral spirits on it, rolled that film all the way out across the screen, and then squeegeed the excess mineral spirits out. That created a suction and a vacuum from the film to the emulsion. And I'm laughing the whole time because one guy pouring, one guy rolling, and two girls mopping up the excess solvent, mineral spirits. And they stood it vertical in front of their Violux exposure unit, and they, unbeknownst to me, they do it every day. But I was shocked, and I still tell that story often.
I'd like to sell that customer coder.
And mineral spirits.
Any other crazy? Yeah, mineral spirits, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when people are getting into this industry, you can make a screen really cheap, right? You can go out and get a light, any UV light that's going to put out UV light, and you can make a screen. So, I mean, with weights on a glass, and you can get by with $50 in equipment from Home Depot and do it. Now, is that recommended? You're probably going to have problems, But, now you can go on eBay and Amazon and get all these LED lights. And there's a lot of people that have done it successfully, but there's also the fact that you don't exactly know what wavelength those LEDs are that you're buying. So, order one from a reputable source where you actually know what the UV output's going to be. Because otherwise, you're just going to struggle.
So I got a question. You guys know my audience are side hustlers. We print wherever we can fit, whatever we can get our hands on. So, a lot of us are printing out our homes with machines like maybe a Fractal or some one station. What should we do better when it comes to disposal of the chemicals that are going there? I've seen in some spaces literally a washout booth over top of the toilet. I've seen all types of different things, but what should somebody printing out of their home do better when it comes to chemicals, or what have you guys seen?
I can share that you should not go to the car wash with your chemicals and
Seen
spray
that.
bottles because you will get caught. And I just heard that from a friend. I have reclaimed screens in my early days working for a chemical company. Clean screens in the bathtub where the mother had washed the children the night before. No kidding. But the emulsion removers, the ink removers, the degreasers, those are all legally Ocean EPA drain safe. So as long as they're going to a city and sewer municipality, they're legally drain safe. It's the guys, and here in the South, it's done a lot, reclaiming outside, and the parking lots and the grass is dead, and the parking lot's blue, red, and green, and orange, and purple from the inks. You can't reclaim screens outside where it's going into the soil or leaching into the gravel or anywhere. So it's legal just to do it and let it go down the drain.
I've definitely seen even the buckets under, and they'll just drain them out to the street.
Yes,
So-
you cannot pour or reclaim and allow the chemistry and the effluents and everything from a screen to a storm drain. That's just like going to a car wash. And I've seen people cleaning screens on the curb because they had a drain right there beside them, and it's highly illegal.
I would also add in, if you're washing your screens out in your basement or garage or something like that, good ventilation is good, regardless. You're living in this area, so you're sleeping, the floor above and everything like that. Do you want to be sleeping where all those fumes are? Probably not. Some are safer than others that are out there, but good ventilation is always going to be key.
All right, so you got, your 150 watt bulb and pie plate, and you want to take it to the next level. What are the first products or equipment that a beginner should invest in? Like, what do you think is the most bang for the buck when you're just trying to elevate your game a little bit and you got nothing? What are the first things to
A
spend
good
money on?
exposure unit. I think that's the key in a good dry area to coat your screens. With that process and a good way to make art, you're on your way. You can print just about anything if you can make a good screen.
The exposure unit, okay.
Exposure unit, and I would say a good enough printer that it's not, for your film positives and everything. You want to be able to, if you can't reproduce a good film positive, it doesn't make a difference what your exposure unit is because it's going to reproduce what you put on there. So those
Yeah.
two things I would say together would definitely be the
I definitely agree with Kevin and Brian. Some of the basics, good, tight tension screens, the right emulsion to fit the right light source that you've chosen, because you truly can't put a pure photopolymer in with a halogen bulb or even the one you bought at Home Depot for that matter. So tight screen, the proper density on the film, the emulsion. So, and we say this a lot, but invest in the screen making process first and foremost, because a good screen can make a good printer look even better. A bad screen can make a quality printer look horrible.
So are certain products help when you're a beginner? Like, in other words, if you don't have the ideal exposure unit, does some emulsions work better?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what would somebody look for in that kind of product?
You'd want something with a large latitude and exposure, so that if you are working with a subpar lamp, that you're not pigeonholed into a certain exposure time. You want something that you have a lot of latitude and failure.
Absolutely. And if they do pick the wrong emulsion, because everybody, we talked about this round table, but everybody wants the perfect emulsion. We want it to be able to print anything on it and do everything we want it to do. But unfortunately, that everybody wants that high solids, pure photopolymer that takes seconds to expose, but there's no latitude. And then they're trying to do it with a 500 watt halogen light that they bought at Home Depot. And the consequences are, you might shoot it and get it to rinse out, but you're probably not going to be able to reclaim that, because, as Kevin mentioned earlier, the proper wavelength of light to expose said particular emulsion is critical. And sometimes you don't know that you've messed up until you try to reclaim it.
Yeah, and so like Brian was saying, something that's got a lot of latitude, dual cure diazo-based emulsion, something that's going to be very forgiving. But also what I like to recommend for people just getting into it is capillary film. It takes a really long time to get good at coating your screens by hand. We talk about autocoaters and the consistency that they give. All of us up here know how to coat screens by hand, right? If all of us coated the same screen, we could measure it and all of them are going to be different. So it doesn't matter how good you are, there's always going to be some inconsistencies. With capillary film, I can teach somebody how to use capillary film and they'll have a perfect screen from day one and they won't have to worry about that. So the consistency of the coating, now you can have a consistent exposure that goes along with that.
What does that cost in comparison? Like, obviously with a film, you know what it's going to cost you, but what does that cost? I've never seen, or not, I didn't say seen, I've heard about it, but I've never seen the process done these days.
Yeah, so capillary film comes in rolls, it comes in cut sheets, so there's different types of emulsion. So there's diazo-based emulsions, there's pure photopolymer emulsions that go into capillary film, so there's a wide range. But, it could be around $1.50 a screen versus maybe 80 cents a screen with direct emulsion, somewhere in that range. But keep in mind that if you're not having to reshoot your screens, now that kind of levels out that cost a little bit, because if it costs you 80 cents on a screen with direct emulsion, but you got to do it twice, now all of a sudden, you're right there.
Yeah, if you're successful with the capillary film the first time, where you failed 5 other times with the emulsion, the cost is zero, because it's priceless. It's perfect, and it's simple.
If you are coating, having the same person coat all the time does help, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. You want that consistency. If you don't have that consistency in your coating, you're going to have color shifts possibly. You're going to have premature exposure. All kinds of things happen.
If you're trying to dial in your exposure, having the same person coat helps
Absolutely.
a lot, right?
Yeah, but also the first screen that they coat in the beginning of the day and the last screen that they coat at the end of the day probably is going to be different. Or if they come in a little hungover or something like that, hey, it happens.
And actually, another simple...
It's not going to be the same as they did the day before.
Does it help? I've seen also, I know early on, I had something so I could coat with 2 hands. That helps, yeah?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, if you can coat with 2 hands, you can have more control over the coater. I'm probably just like everybody else at a fault where I typically will coat with 1 hand, but I preach that you should use both hands as long as you've got a good setup. And an easy way, if you don't have, kind of the screen holder, is in a table, you can screw a board down into the table and into the wall where the screen will actually fit into it, so you don't have to worry about it kicking out or up. and then you can use both hands. So it's a cheap, easy way to come up with a screen holder.
All right, maybe go to questions? Unless you got some other question yourself there, brother.
No, not right now.
All right. Any questions here from the audience? Anything you want to know about screens? We've got the experts here.
Let's go back to what Kevin and Brian both mentioned earlier about the direct-to-screen units. It is almost a must that you have an automatic coder, because the EOM, emulsion over match, the thickness of emulsion on that screen is very critical for those direct-to-screens, whether it's an inkjet, a wax jet, a laser, or whatever it may be. But you almost need the coder before you bring in that type of equipment. And it's also, like Kevin had mentioned, we could, within 10 minutes, we can teach people how to code screens by programming it and pressing a button. Then that screen is consistent enough that that direct-to-screen unit will perform as it's supposed to each and every time without failure.
Yeah, the more you add technology, especially on the computer-to-screen side, you really need to control your screen making a whole lot more now, especially when you have light-based systems. It's extremely critical now that your thickness of your emulsion is consistent with every mesh, every screen, so that you're consistently getting repeatability.
And not to mention, too, that if you're hand coding screens, sometimes along the edge, if you're not really good at hand coding screens, it could get thick. So if you're using one of like the wax systems or the inkjet systems where the head runs across, they're very close to the screen, you could have head strikes and head damage because of how that coding is. So if you're using an auto coder and you take out that, it's going to be much more consistent, and it's going to help with the longevity of the machine.
I've got a question. What's the craziest technique or item you've ever seen used to coat a screen?
Well, I mean, I've seen all kinds of different ways. Everybody has their own little method.
Not the coating trough, the item to actually spread the emulsion.
I mean, I've seen with squeegees, I've seen all that kind of stuff. You pour it on, draw it down. But, I mean, that's not super crazy. There's lots of people that still do it. Is this a loaded question because you have a story that you want to? Okay.
Well, I'll go back to the beginning for me. Even now where I am, I'm relaunching the shop. So the questions it's been really insightful because I've learned you just code the screen and you call it a day. One might have a runnage, might be thick here, you can kind of see through it. But going back through the process, I had a U-do, horrible. Threw it out, never got a good screen out of that thing. I mounted a set to Ryonet from Ryonet to my mom's dryer to get it going. I tried with the light bulb, didn't work. Luckily, I had a friend working at an art school, so she burned all the screens, and I was the guy washing them out in the tub and doing all cleaning the inks and all of that kind of stuff. A lot of us get through this and figure it out. It seems to be there's a lack, I didn't say a lack of information, but there's not a place where people can go to get some of the basic education, because it's just like kind of passed down or figured out. They don't really have that central place. So where do you guys recommend in that case for people looking for information?
I would agree with that. There is no education still to this day in screen printing.
You got ShopTalks.
Exactly. And even if you went into a printing school, screen print is just a fraction of that. So you're right. It's a lot of bad passed down information. But between Chromaline and Saati and KIWO, we all offer training programs. And we'll even come to your facility and do it in house. So you have to get in touch with the right people, and you'll get the right answers. YouTube is not always the end all be all to get information.
Unless it's my YouTube channel.
Well,
or mine. I don't know what he's talking about right now. I was going to let him slide till he spoke up. I got to say, listen.
Emulsion Guru on YouTube, thank you. But you're right. YouTube, I've seen so many crazy videos on YouTube. Just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true. I mean, you probably have heard that before. And I've seen so many bad practices.
I think the thing is that YouTube is relatable, because you see somebody that doesn't really know. They're learning it. Some of them are learning on the process as they go. Or they may think they know because they've gotten it from somewhere else. For example, I learned even from having this conversation, but the lack thereof visibility on some of the content that you may even have out there, or the relatability to what people are going through, I think that's a place where we might be able to create some educational change throughout the process.
Facebook being the same. I am on a bunch of forums, and I just astounded at the level of misunderstanding that is spread around.
The newbies
Facebook's
that's
the
coming
worst.
into this industry really need to do their homework to find a reliable source that's going to give them the correct information, training, education. You know, all of us, Brian, Kevin, myself, I think we do more education and training to get the sales than we do actually sales.
I would
So,
agree with that, because if we educate our customers, they're going to want to do business with us.
Right.
Anybody can sell a product. It's what do you bring to the table?
So
All right,
my last
here we-
question for you guys is, which one of you guys is going to teach me?
Well,
I'm
do you want to
retired.
use the bathtub, or would you like to invest in some automation?
All of it.
I can see Stan walking out of here with a laser and
Sold.
Yeah, how
automatic coder
how
today,
big's
right?
your truck?
Sheesh.
Actually, we missed two things. One is air conditioner is a good piece of equipment for your screen room or where you're doing your screens. And
And-
another is to make sure you have good tension, which whether that's either buy
He mentioned
a
tension.
good screens or get retentionable screens or pay the money for a good screen stretcher. I see a lot of people, they're like, I don't use Newmans anymore. And then you see that they're using their screens till they rip.
Yeah, and along with air conditioner dehumidifiers in your screen room, especially down here in Texas, it gets humid, right? So getting that moisture out of that room is definitely key.
I would
And an
just-
air conditioner helps with
I would
that.
just leave Texas. That's another method. All right. Hey, I want to thank you all. This has been fun and informative. Thanks to Brian and Kevin and Keith here from Saati and Chromaline and KIWO. And thanks, Stan Banks.